got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders and some past guests. The most important past guest, Jimmy, is Haley Zollo of startingline.vc, right? Check out that episode. It's amazing. She talks about her just a great experience in different startups, Trunk Club, and we talk a lot about geeking out on metrics, actually, which all businesses should be paying attention to. And other, kind of the theme, Jimmy, is I'm thinking of what Chicago businesses I've had on the podcast. I had Ross Gordon, who started Catchco and Mystery Tackle Box. Jeremy Smith started Spot Hero. Dan Zawacki started Lobstergram. Ethan Austin I had on started Give Forward. And now he's with Gig Wage. So check those episodes out on Inspired Insider. Before I introduce today's guest, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, which I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. And what we do is we help businesses give to their best relationships, their Dream 100 relationships, by helping you run your podcast. So, Jimmy, for me, the most important thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships, people I admire, people I want to help shout from the rooftops what they're doing, what their company is doing. And I've seen no better way since over the past 10 years than having them on my podcast and profiling them and their company. So if you are a business out there and you've thought of, maybe I've thought about starting a podcast, I've been doing it for over a decade and helping businesses do it. So go to rise25.com and learn more and contact us. And so without further ado, I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Jimmy Zollo. He's the co-founder and CEO of Collaborata, and it's a Chicago-based company serving the insights and marketing research space. They help companies find, shape, and buy expert-led multi-client research projects, and he's going to give some interesting examples. And I'm not sure. I was watching several videos, Jimmy, and the way I think of it is you help companies get expert market research and help that company grow and innovate at kind of a crowdfunding price, because there's multiple companies using research. And so it's really an amazing service and business. They've been featured in Business Insider, BuiltInChicago, and many, many more. And he's also the co-founder of Joe and Bella, which is a service that provides older adults with a full array of products they need. It's amazing for residents of care communities, their families, caregivers, and it's at joeandbella.com. And previously, Jimmy actually helped drive growth at Grubhub, which was, if you haven't heard of it, one of Chicago's most successful tech startups ever. And he helped develop Grubhub's industry-leading restaurant network. And I think you were traveling all over the country, helping launch new markets and grow existing ones, and also worked for the Chicago Bulls. Jimmy, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. That's a big intro. So I appreciate it. The pressure's on.
It's all fact-checked.
I don't think I'll live up to Haley's podcast, but I'll do my best to come in right underneath.
That's a smart husband to say that. But I want to talk about Collaborata for a second, and maybe just in your words, what you guys do. And I wanted, before we hit record, we were talking about social equity, but did I get that right? As far as what do you guys do? Like, who are the perfect ideal clients to be using Collaborata?
Yeah, I think you explained it really well. So we bring together multiple organizations to share the cost of really large scale, ambitious research projects that are typically too large for one individual organization to undertake on their own. And the type of clients we work with are the major brands. So it's the NBA, it's Reebok, it's Disney, it's AARP. It's these massive brands, but even despite their size, sharing makes sense because you can stretch your dollar and you can do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So right now what we're working on, we put together a group called the Multicultural Insights Collective, which is a collaborative of about 7 other research organizations, all of whom besides me are led by either a woman or a person of color. And our first project that we're launching early this year, hopefully by end of February, is called Words Matter. The goal is to take a serious look at the language that we use around race, around social justice, around social equity in this country, and put together a roadmap for brands on how to best authentically engage in that conversation. This came about in the aftermath of George Floyd. We were watching as brands like really rushed to respond and put out statements. A lot of them immediately within 24 hours put something up on social media saying, hey, we stand with Black Lives Matter and here is why. But our question was, are the statements that those brands were making authentic? Is the statements they're making consistent with what their actions as an organization are? And are they even what people of underrepresented groups and people of color actually want brands to be saying and doing in those times? So it's a really ambitious undertaking, but something that matters a lot.
Have you found anything so far from the research, or are there any examples, or maybe you can comment on, because you're seeing this come out and now you're probably digging into the research on. There's two different things. One, the message you put out, and two, is it resonating with the people it should be resonating with, right? So what have you been seeing as you're digging through the research? As it is a big undertaking. What brands or, should be saying or doing that is shown in the research?
Yeah, so I think we've learned two really interesting things so far. The first one, which is not surprising, is that authenticity is really easy for people to figure out. So an example of a good and a bad. NASCAR this year, as far as a good, when they removed the Confederate flags from being allowed in their arenas, and when Bubba
Does that seem
Wallace,
like a no-brainer or no?
It should have been a no-brainer, but for their fan base, it was really controversial at the time.
Totally.
They got thousands and thousands of fans saying they're never coming to a NASCAR event ever again. But they finally put their foot down, and then at the same time, Bubba Wallace, their only driver of color, found a noose in his locker, and wow. they stood with the NASCAR really strongly stood behind him, and all the drivers stood behind him, and had maybe the most iconic sports moment of 2020 because of it. And the interesting thing, looking back at 2020, NASCAR's numbers relative to every other sports league were phenomenal. They saw the least drop out of every other sport league during lockdown and during quarantine. And I think a lot of that goes to they weren't hiding behind their values. They were authentic about it. On the flip side, I won't
quick,
please.
Jimmy, before we get to the flip side, you bring up something very interesting with NASCAR, and it kind of parallels what happened, whenever someone's watching this, at Capitol Hill. And I was watching one of the Michigan constituents talk about how, if talking about that certain things are wrong with the people that stormed, even if it's going to affect you getting elected, right? And it seemed like that's what you're saying with NASCAR as well. It's maybe a no-brainer decision for some people, but they knew it was going to piss a lot of people off.
That's exactly right. To take a stand that is going to offend a portion of your base, even if you think it's the morally right thing to do, hasn't always been easy for big brands to do, especially recently. They tend to hide behind things. So the flip side was I won't throw this specific company under the bus, but there was a fast food organization who like everyone else put out a statement about how they stand with Black Lives Matter and they believed in defunding the police and all that. A couple hours after they released that statement, they fired an employee for wearing a Black Lives Matter face mask to work. So like that inauthenticity, when that gets caught, really, really hurts. And it becomes so obvious who's speaking out of both sides.
Do any other good examples stick out along with NASCAR?
Yeah, I actually think the NBA, who their numbers were way down, but that's a longer conversation as to why. I think it's more that their target demo is on social media, not sitting behind watching a full NBA game anymore. But I think the NBA did a phenomenal job this year. not just in how they stood up for Black Lives Matter, but there have been they stood up for voting rights acts. They did everything they could to make every single NBA stadium available for in-person voting during the election, which was a pretty incredible undertaking, something that had never been done before, and was done because of not just the actions of the players and their sort of push, but the entire league got behind it. So the NBA has just been an absolute leader in saying what you mean and meaning what you say.
Jimmy, talk to me about that for a second. So the NBA comes to you, they're like, Jimmy, we totally see this is valuable. We know words matter. We need to be better at this. And usually the companies that are really good at it want to be better. And right. How does it work with, they're like, let's do it. How does it work with them working with you?
Yeah, so there are a few different ways to work with us. The first is typically Collaborata is essentially an incubator of big ideas. So for example, in this case, the idea is putting together a universal language definitions of what the words of social justice and social equity actually mean. So when we have that idea, we then form a team behind it. We always bring in a subject matter expert. If not multiple subject matter experts, as well as bring in some unique research tools to make sure that we can do the project at scale in a really interesting, effective way. From there, once we sort of define the goals of the research, we look to go find others and see who maybe natural allies are, who would be good to share that research with. But in other cases, there have been some really surprising collaborations that we're proud of. We've had Procter & Gamble and Unilever on the same project together, which was pretty cool. We had Bank of America and Global Atlantic Financial and Wells Fargo together, and a number of other financial institutions who typically feel like competitors, but for the sake of learning and knowledge and sort of expediting their own internal growth and innovation, they're willing to work with competitors, which is really validating for what we're trying to do.
When they collaborate, how do they typically use the research? So if the NBA is like, cool, like we actually with social equity, here's some language and here's some stuff that we want to use, do they usually actually push it out across commercials or logo? Like, how have you seen them use the research?
Yeah, so it depends on the specific team that we're working with within an organization. Typically, though, it's used for communication strategies, so across media, so whether that's commercial, whether that's social media, how they're using their brand messaging. A lot of times it's also product innovation too. So we've done a lot of really interesting work in the aging and longevity space, specifically with companies like Procter & Gamble and Bank of America. And those organizations use that information to ensure that they're best serving a specific audience and developing the types of products and services that can help them, specifically in this case, as they age. The other interesting one is occasionally, depending on the organization that we're working with, they've actually used this for lobbying purposes as well, to ensure that they have a full and complete understanding of a specific group of people within this country and how to make sure that this country is best representing their needs.
Let's talk about, before we hit record, you were talking about hacking longevity. That's right up my alley. I love talking about health stuff. And I didn't want you to tell me anything because I want to hear it for the first time. So what did you mean by that?
So hacking longevity is a series of research projects that we've been doing over the past 4 years. We're actually now on our third one. So we started with the foundational research called Hacking Longevity, which took a look at Americans 65 plus in this country and sort of looked at their aging journey. Because as we know right now, the way in which we age is very different than how our parents' generation aged. And the way millennials are aging, the way Gen Z is aging is going to be very different for a multitude of reasons, whether that be our health, our financial stability, the activities that we do. So we took a foundational look at aging within this country. From there, we then, what we found was that your specific place that as you age, there are specific events that can happen that fundamentally change who you are as a person, right? Not surprising, but we defined 5 of them for the next Hacking Longevity, and dove into those, what we call life shifts. One of them we called aging single. So it was an individual who either became divorced or widowed later in life, obviously totally unexpected and could have major, obviously, financial ramifications, but is also really impactful from a health perspective as well, and how that can impact someone. We looked at a happier one, like becoming a grandparent for the first time, and how that changes somebody's life. And particularly now, boomers are the most involved grandparents we've ever seen. They really are kind of second parents to their grandchildren. They're spending more money than grandparents have ever spent on their grandchildren, which is a really interesting thing. And for organizations that we work with, that's something that they definitely need to better understand.
So what have you found with the research from Hacking Longevity that you've changed because you know it's going to help you live healthier, longer, better, happier, whatever it is?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. The first one from a health perspective is I think it reinforces the need to be really, really active and really healthy with how I eat. And for me, being healthy, that means low impact. So I try and ride my bike as much as I can. Although in Chicago right now, that's not very easy. But from a diet perspective too, that means a lot. The other big thing from a financial perspective is understanding that despite hopefully the plenty of success that Collaborata and any other endeavor that we may have, is that millennials are not going to retire in the same way that our parents' generation will retire. The retirement age right now is 65. The reason that retirement age was originally set at 65 because at the time the average American was dying at the age of 64. So we need to know that that sort of social security nest egg probably won't exist for our generation. And we're going to have to work later in life than our parents' generation ever did, and just sort of be prepared for that and understand, hey, we've got to save now, but also not burn out now. There's that balance knowing that we're going to be working later into life, regardless of a lot of things that are outside of our control.
What made you start going into the Hacking Longevity? And one of my favorite books is The Blue Zones. And it talks about kind of some of the lessons for living longer. And it did some, mathematical research on, and, there's certain blue zones in the world of people are more likely to live to over 100. And so I'm fascinated by this type of research. What made you go down that path?
No, it was actually the inspiration of one of our clients. So one of our clients is AARP, and they've been our champion behind this project for the last 4 years, and have been really sort of instrumental in driving where we go. This was something that they wanted to get behind. And we've partnered with an expert as well on this. Her name's Lori Bitter. She's the president of an organization called The Business of Aging. And she's phenomenal when it comes to understanding this audience. She used to lead JWT's Boomer Group. She's sort of a foremost thought leader when it comes to aging and longevity in this country. But that was really the inspiration was AARP, as well as some past research we had done on generations in the country.
And this kind of goes a little bit, Jimmy, into Joe and Bella. You're right, and you started Joe and Bella, and that comes from a personal story.
Yes. So thanks for bringing that up. So just within the last few weeks, we've officially launched Joe and Bella. So joeandbella.com. And it comes from a very personal place. So back in 2012, it was no longer safe for my grandparents to live on their own. Despite having 24/7 in-home care, my grandmother was still falling, and it was just dangerous for them not to be in an assisted care community. My grandfather at the time was suffering from Parkinson's and dementia, and it made sense that they had a higher level of care afforded to them. So we after my grandmother fell again, we rushed to move them into a care community outside of Chicago, and it was Christmas Eve, so it was a totally last minute move in. It was a horrible night, and as you're moving a loved one into a care community of any kind, whether it's independent living or skilled nursing or memory care, it's really daunting, and you question a lot. You think, am I doing the right thing? Is this really what's best for them? And if you say yes to that, you still don't know, do they have everything they're going to need when they're there? Do they have all of their things? Do they have all the clothes? Do they have the right toiletry? Do they have the right technology so that we can communicate with them better in this new environment that's going to totally change how they've lived their lives up until this point? So it's this really horrible and daunting experience. And the first day that we were there, the Christmas Eve that we moved them in, is when we met Joe and Bella. We noticed they were kind of goofing around and following us around and making a lot of jokes. And we started talking to them. They were two widowed Holocaust survivors who ended up being essentially adopted grandparents to us. They started coming to every single family event we had, whether that was Thanksgiving or Hanukkah, you name it, they were there. And they played a really instrumental role in my grandparents' life. They were sort of this really sort of phenomenal transition that part of this transition that if they weren't there, would have been so much harder on my grandparents. They ate every single meal together for the rest of my grandfather's life. So it was this really, really beautiful thing. So that was back in 2012. My grandmother had been in a care community ever since. And then during COVID, the challenge of helping her was obviously expedited because they had to go into full lockdown. We could no longer benefit of going into a room and looking around and saying, hey, do you have enough toothpaste? Do you have enough mouthwash? Or how's your clothes? Do you need new shoes? Do you need new socks? Because she was also now at this point suffering from dementia. So even if we asked her those questions, she wasn't able to answer. And if we were asking the caregivers who are doing such a phenomenal job, they could look, but their time at that point was best served ensuring that COVID wasn't getting into the community. So that's why we launched Joe and Bella. So it's a really simple service to ensure that those that are in assisted care of any kind have really easy access to everything they need, from toiletries to some really cool tech products that are out there now to clothing and kind of everything in between.
Thank you for sharing that. It's such a tough journey. Wow. I mean, especially aging. I mean, it's no joke, you know? So how does it work? Someone goes to the site and what do they do?
Yes. Yeah, so someone can go to the site, whether that is a caregiver at a community can order on behalf of their residents, or a family member ordering on behalf of their loved one. And you can sign up and get a lot of products, anything that is consumable. So whether that's toiletries, you can set up for automatic reordering, so you never have to worry about your loved one running out of anything that they would need. And then there's also a bunch of other really great products up there as well. And we even have really cool gifts up there. Because I know one of the toughest things was always trying to figure out what to get my grandmother, because the default answer was always just a crossword puzzle, because that was the one thing that even with dementia, she could always do a crossword puzzle in pen. So we knew we could always get her that, but we've been able to find some really great products up there, and we're pretty excited about it.
I love it. Some people can check that out, joeandbella.com.
joeandbella.com.
Okay.
Thank you.
Back to Collaborata for a second. What was the initial idea behind it?
Yeah, so the initial idea, man, and it has changed a lot. We've gone through, like every startup, a million different pivots. But the initial idea was it was just going to be a crowdfunding platform for research of any kind. And at the time, it was going to be each project needed 10 clients attached to it. And a project would go up there and you would pay 10% and you get the results. It's become way more hands-on than that. It didn't really become the open marketplace that we envisioned, just because research is so proprietary that organizations weren't necessarily comfortable going on there and engaging in it with that type of way. And the other big thing that we had to go in and adjust was our research partners had to be of such a high level of vetting in order to get on the platform now that we didn't do initially. So for each project that we now run, we go out and get someone who is uniquely qualified to do that work based upon their level of experience and expertise, versus initially any research firm that would come to us with a cool idea, we'd say, go and put it up. But it's really shifted since then.
Jimmy, what was a key, oftentimes when companies change, it's usually driven by customers demanding certain things, and the smart ones listen to their customers and what they're asking and deliver what they want, and then more of that. But what was a customer or a request you got that really helped you shape what the company does now?
Yeah, I think it was when we found out that the actual model that we had set up just didn't make any sense. So it was every project needed 10 clients, so everyone was paying 10%. That didn't make any sense. So I think it was actually ARP who came to us with the idea of hacking longevity and said, hey, we're actually willing to underwrite a really high percentage, well over 10% of this cost, in order to get the research off the ground. And also that way it helps incentivize some other really great companies to come and collaborate with us. So the idea then really shifted from, this isn't just about cost savings, but it is the value of the collaboration. It's the value of the partnerships. And it's about having this, what we call our champion behind it, ARP, who's really sort of instrumental in driving the project and the research forward.
I'm interested also, Jimmy, how you navigate these, what you looks like competitors, and they're getting this intel and this IP and getting them to work together. So what are some of those? Give me an example. And you talked about one earlier. At first glance, these look like competitors. And I would think they are spending the time, energy, and money on this IP. They don't want to share it with the other organization. What was the collaboration conversation look like so it gets people out of that mindset of, no, actually, this is actually better than, together than not?
Yeah, it's really tricky. And there's still people we will run into that will refuse to work with us just for that point. There was, I won't say the company, but there was a VP at one of the biggest research buyers in the country. So there are about six companies that really sort of dominate this landscape. And he said, Jimmy, I don't really understand what you're doing. I don't know. This was about 5 years ago. I don't think I would ever buy anything from you because I don't want anyone else to be able to see what we do. But he goes, but I'd also never get in an Uber. So maybe you have a decent idea. Then from there, at the end of the call, we spoke for another 30 minutes. He goes, and by the way, give me a call back if any of my big competitors buy something and let me know what it is, because I'll sign on board then and collaborate with them. So he just didn't want to be the first one to jump in. And I think that's typically what it is that FOMO, the fear of missing out on this information has been really key and critical to us. But also, at the end of the day, we live in a world where there is so much data. There is so much information that everyone's going to get it somehow or some way. Facebook is getting the same information Google is. Granted, they're collecting slightly different data sources, but the depth of their data is similar. So everyone else who is not Facebook, who is not Google, who is not Amazon, is at this massive data disadvantage. And what we're trying to do is democratize access to all of this other data that's out there in the world and give them a level playing field against these tech giants. Because right now, it's not fair, the level of access that they have relative to everybody else.
Talk about some of the popular research categories. So we talk about, obviously hacking longevity and health, right? Mm-hmm. Social equity and language. What else have you seen, trends of people researching?
Yeah, we've done a lot of generational research recently, which has been pretty interesting. A lot of folks really want to understand Gen Z and how brands are finally starting to pick on how different they are than millennials and how much they reject about millennial behavior, which is really, really interesting. I think an example of that would be when millennials think about sustainability. For them, that's buying from a brand that says they're sustainable on their website, versus Gen Z would go and buy thrift clothes. So there are these really massive differences between these generations. So I think that's the first thing, is we're doing a lot of generational work. We do a project every year called Generation Nation that takes a foundational look at the 4 largest generational cohorts in the US and sort of compares and contrasts their different views. And it's sort of a really interesting thing to see how the country is shifting over time, because it's something we've done for so long. Last year, we did an interesting project called Gen Z Moms, which the idea is to take a forward look at what the next generation of parents is going to be. And we worked with some really cool brands on that one as well.
That's really cool. Yeah, because I could see you are seeing a lot of this first, and then you really have a broad view of the trends that are going on. I want to hear about what shaped you, and specifically Grubhub and the Bulls. Talk about what were some of the lessons you learned in a story from the Chicago Bulls days.
Yeah, so working for the Bulls was really cool. So the offices for the Bulls are right there in the United Center, and I grew up a Bulls fan, so it was just incredible. Every single day you walk into the arena past the Michael Jordan statue and then go and get to work. So it was a phenomenal and cool experience, but I was there at a unique time. So I was there the year of the NBA lockout, where it was a shortened season, as well as the previous season, Derrick Rose had won the MVP. So there was all this hype around the Bulls. And I was there just for within a few months, because of the hype around the team coming into the season. We had sold out literally everything there was to sell. Every single season ticket, every individual game ticket, just about every single sponsorship was gone. And we more or less had the option of, hey, you guys can stay and be sort of glorified customer service at this point throughout this year, and then next year start selling again, or not. And I chose or not. So I left without really knowing what I wanted to do, but I knew as a salesperson and someone that liked to be really busy, or really needs to be really busy, that I wanted to find a situation where I couldn't sell out, that there was always going to be something next to do, and sort of that feeling of we had achieved something, like we've gotten to the top of the mountain and there was no sort of other place to go, was really weird. So because of that's how I fell in love with startups. And I had gone to, a little bit after that, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had gone to 1871 just to sort of network with some people, and I had stumbled into a talk. Matt Maloney, the founder of Grubhub, was speaking there. And I just sort of fell in love with what he was saying about how he was so convinced at the time, and this was well before online food ordering had really taken off, but he was so convinced that Grubhub was going to blow up and that they were going to be the next big Chicago startup. And that night I applied for a job at Grubhub. I think I interviewed a few days later and started the following week. And it was just a phenomenal experience, and really sort of built my love for startup culture, especially here in Chicago.
It seems so obvious now, but back then it wasn't so obvious on online ordering. When you went into a new city, like, because you had to go for expansion, what were some of the conversations you had to have? Because you have to do some convincing. It wasn't, these people were early adopters, I imagine.
Yeah, it was, those early conversations were so different than the conversations I would have 4 years later. The first few years were people didn't believe it would work. Restaurant owners would laugh at us, said, no one's going to order online. No one's going to order food. They're just going to call us. Why wouldn't they just call us on their phone? This doesn't make any sense. We were getting laughed at. And the other big challenge was actually competing with another Chicago startup, Groupon, because we would call, hey, this is Jimmy from Grubhub. And they said, no, we don't like Groupon. And they would hang up on us.
Geez, both from Chicago.
Right. It was way too similar. But eventually what ended up happening and what ended up working was literally just sitting down with restaurant owners and doing the math and saying, all right, here's how many orders are coming into this zip code that right now are going to these restaurants next door, these restaurants that you're competing with. And then sort of going through their own costs on a per order basis to show them, hey, this is what you could make on a per order basis if you were to start working with Grubhub. And once we sort of got over that threshold and sort of learned how to best communicate that with our restaurant partners, things really started taking off.
Any favorite customers that you worked with at Grubhub?
Absolutely. So there was a Chinese restaurant in St. Louis, and no one there spoke English, and they were all first generation Americans. And they had just opened up a few months earlier, and they were really, really struggling. And I was trying to convince them to be on Grubhub and explain that, hey, Chinese restaurants are doing really well in St. Louis, and maybe this is a good way to get your name out there. And they didn't know what I was saying. There was this really tough language barrier. And then they had taken me into their kitchen because it was before dinner rush was about to start. And their, I think 13 or 14-year-old daughter was in there doing her homework. And she had had overheard our conversation, and she spoke fluent English, and she started translating on my behalf to her parents as to why they ought to be on Grubhub. And because of her, they ended up joining. They've ended up being a really big success. They've opened multiple restaurants, and it's just a sort of a really cool story of sort of the iconic American dream of coming here, opening up your own business, really being an authentic family business, and it's been fun to watch.
So, what made you, Jimmy? What was the next transition? So, towards the end of Grubhub, I mean, it's grown a lot, right?
Yes. They've been phenomenal. So the transition out of Grubhub was right after Grubhub went public. That following week, they brought in a team of attorneys to tell us what the new rules of operations were, which is great. You're now a publicly traded company. You absolutely have to behave differently than how you had before. But for me, as sort of someone who had fallen in love with Grubhub because it was a startup and sort of that freedom and that flexibility that startups entail. Once they gave that speech, I started coming up with different business ideas and figuring out what I wanted to do on my own. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad was an entrepreneur. My grandfather was. So I knew I always wanted to do my own thing. And right after that IPO, it just felt like the right time.
What's some best advice you've received from your dad or your grandfather?
I'll give you one from my grandfather, is not to always trust your gut, which was an interesting lesson. So his entrepreneurial story was he was college roommates with Hugh Hefner. And the two of them had started a magazine together called Chicago. And it did okay. I think it had a few editions before it eventually went under. And Hefner came back to my grandfather and said, hey, Bert, I've got this great idea for a new magazine. I'm going to call it Playboy. And he explained to my grandfather what it was. And my grandfather goes, absolutely not. I do not want to be a part of that. It's going to be a horrible failure. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. And Hefner, of course, goes on to found Playboy. And those first few editions, most of the articles are written by my grandfather under a pseudonym because my grandmother refused to let him use his last name in it. So it was something they didn't like to talk about a lot. But the lesson is that your gut's not always right, and to take chances. That's
amazing. That's an amazing story. Does he still have those laminated somewhere, or the articles he wrote in those first editions?
It's a funny story. So they never had any of them because my grandmother refused to have them in the house. She didn't want any association with it.
I get that.
Yeah, but maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I saw a first edition was on eBay. So I paid way too much money to get a first edition. I've got a frame now, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing. Your wife's like, why are you buying this? You're like,
right, yeah, don't worry.
Research. It's my grandfather's legacy. I need to buy these.
Exactly.
You could explain that one away. First of all, I have 2 last questions, Jeremy. I just want to thank you. Thanks for sharing the amazing stories. Everyone should check out Collaborata.com. They can check out joeandbella.com. Check out other episodes of the podcast. I always ask, because it's Inspired Insider, is there any other places we should point people towards, by the way, online to check out what you're working on? Are those the best places?
Those are the best places. Instagram, shopjoeandbella.com, Twitter @Collaborata, @shopjoebella. But yeah, please check us out. And somehow in what I just said, that turned on Siri. So Siri started playing from that. I'm not quite sure how.
I don't know if anyone could top a grandfather story that you just told, Jimmy. But I always ask this Inspired Insider, what has been a challenging time, low moment? We know is the entrepreneur journey. It's lots of ups and downs. And then on the flip side, what's been a proud moment for you in the journey? What's been a challenging time or a low point that you think back on that, kind of pushed you forward?
Yeah. Getting Collaborata off the ground was really, really hard. Like I said, initially, we just didn't have the model right. And it took us nearly 10 months before we made a sale. And those first few days after you wake up of quitting your job and not having a salary, at first it's exciting. And then you go 10 months without making a sale. And every type of doubt that you've ever had, every negative thought you've had about, am I the right person to do this? Is this a good idea? Why would I leave sort of a rocket ship of a company? Every single doubt creeps in. So that was really, really hard. And
you're a salesperson, at heart, right?
Yeah.
You're used to going city to city and making sales.
Exactly. So to go 10 months, it was brutal. But once we broke through and once we had our first big success, was a project called Generation Nation, and it brought in 10 companies and some iconic brands, including the NBA and Ford and Reebok, among others. And once that happened, the trajectory of the business sort of changed overnight. And it changed because, number one, we didn't stop testing new ideas. Our initial sort of assumptions of how we were going to build the business were all wrong. I'm sure a lot of our assumptions about how we're going to continue to build the business are wrong. But we just didn't stop testing and we didn't stop trying to figure it out. So that
why didn't you quit? At month 4, month 5, month 6, month 7, month 8, what kept you going?
I don't have a good explanation other than I really hate to quit. I was so convinced that there was something there, that we were sitting on an idea that it fundamentally made sense for organizations to share their data, to democratize it so that they can compete with the big tech companies on an even playing field. I was so convinced of that just basic thesis. I knew we had sort of how we do that wrong, but I thought if we just kept sort of poking at it, that we would figure it out. And
you're like your belief was kind of pushing you forward, and maybe the execution, you had to tweak. I gotcha. On the flip side, proud moment for you.
Yeah, so I would say launching Joe and Bella has been a really proud moment. So Collaborata for us is sort of like this really great commercial product that we've put together. Joe and Bella to me is something that's really personal, that right now for folks in assisted care or nursing homes or skilled nursing, it is really, really hard. They can't see their families. A lot of them can't talk on the phone. It's horrible. So for us to be able to give back in any way we can to help those in assisted care in any small way is something that we're really proud of. And we've been able to roll up the site and get it launched in a couple of months has been, while we're running another business full time, has been something we're really, really proud about.
Jimmy, thank you. Everyone check out Collaborata.com, check out joeandbella.com, and more episodes on the podcast. Thanks again.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.